I've never been one to keep score. I fed people without counting mouths, paid bills without asking for returns. That's how I was raised. My mother used to say, "Rosa, family doesn't owe, family remembers." But standing in my quiet kitchen with 3 unopened wedding envelopes and a phone that wouldn't ring, I realized something. My family hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. It started the way these things always do. Not with a slap, not with a scream, just a silence. An eerie, polite sort of void where warmth used to be. The wedding had been 2 weeks ago, a summer ceremony, in Volterra, in the hills. My son Marco and his fiancée Gabby had insisted on the full affair: imported linens, limoncello favors with custom labels, and a 7-piece string ensemble flown in from Rome. I wrote the checks, quietly, one by one, not because they asked nicely, but because they looked at me like it was already done, like I was the ATM of gratitude. I paid for the venue. I paid for the villa. I even paid for her mother's dress when the boutique said it was final sale. Gaby had called me Mama Rosa then, with a giggle and her arm looped around mine, as if I were some beloved sitcom matriarch. And Marco, my only son, my boy with the same sharp nose as his father Giovanni, had kissed my cheek and said, "You're giving us the future, Ma." I didn't ask for much in return. A front row seat, a toast, maybe a few pictures, maybe even to feel like a mother, not a sponsor. Instead, I got a seat 2 rows back, between one of Gabby's cousins and a man who kept coughing into his linen napkin like a tractor, starting in winter. No one looked my way during the ceremony, not when Marco read his vows, not even when Gabby's father stood up to thank everyone who had made this all possible. I remember swallowing hard and adjusting my coat. Yes, I wore a coat, in summer, that old navy wool one Giovanni had liked. It felt like armor. After the reception, I lingered by the gift table. One of the staff had accidentally handed me a box labeled vendors only. I took that as a sign. I left quietly that night. No one noticed. Not even when I asked Gabby for a photo and she said, "We're kind of doing couple shots now, maybe later?" Marco had already gone back inside, following the DJ's cue. And then, nothing. For 2 weeks, I messaged. I called. I even sent Gabby a recipe for the torta di mele she liked so much. When she first came to dinner, no reply. Then, last night, I tried to tag them in a photo I took of the wedding cake. It wouldn't let me. Blocked on everything. Blocked. I sat there for a full minute, just staring at the screen. My first thought wasn't even anger, it was confusion. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Then I checked their profiles through my niece's account. They had posted a new honeymoon photo in Positano. The caption read, "Real family is chosen. Them." I put the phone down, opened the drawer under the stove, and pulled out my old recipe notebook. Not to write anything. I just needed to feel paper that remembered me. And still, I didn't cry. That part of me had dried up, I think during the long months after Giovanni passed. He'd been a plumber. Never flashy, never lazy. He fixed things with his hands and his silence. I always said he left behind more loyalty in his toolbox than most people did in their wills. Marco was supposed to inherit that. The loyalty, not the wrench, but he'd inherited something else instead. A taste for new wife, new house, new life, and no room in it for a mother with an old coat and an older nose that never healed straight. I didn't sleep that night. I made lentil soup. Not because I was hungry, but because Giovanni always said the smell made a house feel strong. Around 3 a.m., I found myself standing in front of the stone wall in the back garden, the one with the faded fresco of Madonna della Misericordia. It's peeling now. Time gets even to the saints. I stood there with my hands folded tight and thought about all the small things I'd signed, the transfers, the joint accounts, the loan applications I helped push through when Marco was short on down payments. And suddenly, a memory came back, like an old spice rising from the back of a shelf. The condo. Their honeymoon condo in Amalfi. The one they begged me to help secure for tax reasons. The paperwork had been rushed. Marco had said, "Just sign this for now, Ma. You'll technically co-own it, but it's just for the bank." Technically co-own. I walked inside, took off my coat, and opened the red folder I kept under the pantry floorboards. Most people keep secrets in diaries. I keep mine in legal paper. There it was. My name. In ink. As co-owner, co-investor, joint authority over withdrawals from the newly opened investment account linked to the condo. They didn't just block me. They blocked their landlady. I laughed once, a bitter little sound that came from deep in my chest. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just clarity. Then I poured myself a small amaro and sat down at the kitchen table. At 4:10 a.m. I called Antonio, my banker, Giovanni's old friend. He answered on the second ring. Rosa? Antonio's voice crackled through the line, thick with sleep and concern. It's me, I said. I hope I didn't wake your wife. She's in Milan for the week. What's wrong? I took a slow breath. I need to talk. It's about Marco, and Gabby, and the honeymoon condo. There was a pause. Then the tone changed, subtly, but I caught it. Tell me everything. I didn't go into detail about the wedding. Antonio had known me long enough to recognize my silences. He didn't need drama, he needed data, so I told him about the blocked messages, the cold shoulders, the property documents I'd just pulled from my folder. My name printed cleanly under co-owner, my signature dated 4 months ago. He didn't ask if I wanted to retaliate. He asked if I had the original deed. I do, I said, and every transfer I funded, bank wires. Even the venue payment. The invoices are in my name. He exhaled slowly. Do you want to go scorched earth? No, I replied. I want them to remember who they dismissed. And I want you to help me make it unforgettable. Antonio didn't laugh. He just said, come to the branch at 9. I'll block 2 hours. By 7 a.m., I was already dressed. Not in black. That would have felt too theatrical. I wore my navy coat again, the one I always wore for strength, and pinned my hair back with 2 clips so the waves would stay out of my face. I took a bus into town. My little car needed a new battery, and I wasn't in the mood for mechanics. I wanted silence. I wanted the feeling of the city waking up slowly, as if it too had something to make right. Antonio's branch had tall windows that let the sunlight slice through like white gold. When I walked in, he was already at his desk, tie loose, sleeves rolled up. He didn't stand, just gestured to the seat across from him. Let's begin. First, we reviewed the Amalfi condo. The contract Marco had signed with me made me a 50% stakeholder, not just in name, in equity. That meant the value, the resale, and most importantly, the rental income from their honeymoon sublets all passed through a holding account, which I controlled. Then we moved on to the business investment fund. Marco convinced me to help Gabby register a digital design business 6 months ago, I said. She said it was for tax purposes and early seed funding. Antonio pulled the registry file. Signora Rosa, he said slowly, turning the monitor to me. You're listed as the guarantor and silent partner. You have rights to withdraw your initial capital plus a 6% dividend on their declared income. My lips twitched. They're running the business through the same account as their honeymoon rental. It's all braided together. He nodded. Which means, I own the rope, I said, and I can pull it. It took us 2 hours, we didn't change anything yet. We positioned. He helped me prepare freeze notices for the fund accounts, pre-drafted a lien reassignment in case they tried to sell the condo, and restructured the flow of payments from the Amalfi rental to divert back into my personal savings. We didn't alert anyone. Not yet. They'll feel it, Antonio said, as I signed the last authorization form. But it'll come in ripples. That's fine, I said. A ripple can break a dam if you time it right. He folded the paperwork, slid it into a plain brown envelope, and handed it to me. I'll execute the transfers tomorrow morning. Quietly, let them enjoy their wine one more night. That night, I returned home just as the bells rang, for Vespers. The street was quiet. No kids playing ball, no scooters rushing past, just the sound of one neighbor sweeping their doorway and the hum of a television somewhere inside. I put the brown envelope on the counter, then made a stovetop espresso, 1 sugar, just the way Giovanni used to do it for me when I had long days ahead. I didn't call Marco. I didn't write Gabby. I didn't need to. They'd chosen to erase me. So I was going to become unforgettable. At 11:17 the next morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then, another blocked ID. Ignored. Then came the text. Did you change something with the bank? We can't access the condo account. No greeting, no apology, no warmth, just panic. In text form. I smiled faintly. Not because I enjoyed their stress, but because I had lived in it alone for far too long. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to my old hutch, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out a small, pale blue envelope. It had been there for years. Addressed in Giovanni's handwriting. To Rosa. For when you need to remember your worth. I'd never opened it. Never wanted to cry over paper, but today, I felt ready. Inside, a single note. Never beg anyone to see you. Not when you built the floor they're standing on. I set it on the windowsill and opened the shutters. Light poured in. So did clarity. Let them sweat. Let them wonder. Let them finally ask the question they should have asked before they turned their backs. What happens when the woman we depended on stops depending on us? By the second day, the silence I gave them was louder than anything they'd ever said to me. I didn't post online, didn't reply to texts, didn't even read the ones that came in. But I did see the preview on my lock screen when Gabby messaged, "This has to be a misunderstanding. Can you please call Marco?" No. They made everything loud when they wanted something. Wedding plans, budgeting meetings, dress consultations. They needed me to be present, active, generous. But now silence felt like justice. They called from a hotel phone next. The Amalfi rental had defaulted on an automatic payment. They had used the same business card, Gabby, registered under our mutual holdings. And because I froze the outflow, declined. They'd gone from luxury to problem solving in 24 hours. I heard from Antonio later that afternoon. They've contacted the bank. I kept stirring my soup, and they were told to reach out to the co-owner. I didn't even smile. Let them. By the third morning, my cousin Teresa sent me a screenshot from Facebook. Gaby's mother had posted a vague status about betrayal within the family and how money changes people. Funny, I thought. Money hadn't changed me. It had just reminded me who I'd always been, the backbone, the one who held up everything while they played at the top of the structure. I forwarded the post to Antonio. Make sure they can't redirect funds through any affiliated entities, I added. They'll try something. He replied within minutes. Already closed all redirects. They can't touch the holdings without your signature. Your safety net is bulletproof now. That night, I went through my old notebooks, the ones I used to keep grocery lists in. Meals for 10 stretched from one chicken, how to soak beans to get them just soft enough without gas. I turned a page and saw Marco's scrawl. He had drawn a picture of me when he was maybe 8. Stick arms, wide smile, under the caption, "My mom is the boss of the whole world." It nearly broke me. Nearly. But I wasn't here to grieve. I was here to remember. On the 5th day, Marco left a voicemail. "Ma, please, we didn't mean to hurt you. Gabby was just trying to set boundaries and things got miscommunicated. This money situation, it's a lot. Can we meet?" I played it twice. Once for the words, once for the tone. He didn't say sorry. He didn't even acknowledge what they'd done. He just wanted the door open again. And doors swing both ways, so I shut mine. At 3:00 p.m., I walked to the notary office 2 blocks from the church. The receptionist greeted me kindly. She knew me by name. Small towns don't forget the ones who feed the priest on feast days. I signed 3 documents. A formal declaration of exclusive control over all joint assets. A transfer of all earnings from the honeymoon rental into a trust for my niece's daughter. And a final clause, any future withdrawals by Marco or Gabby required written approval from me, notarized. I didn't just protect myself. I secured the next girl who would grow up watching how adults treat women like me. By the 6th day, Gabby tried something new. She sent me a bouquet. Peach roses. A card that read, "Let's reset. You'll always be family." I didn't respond. I took the flowers, pressed one into an old photo album between the pages, and dumped the rest into the compost bin. Roses wilt fast when they're rooted in lies. That evening, my friend Lucia called. "Rosa, everyone's talking. They're painting you like some bitter old witch who's punishing your own son." I stirred my tea slowly. Good. Let them talk. Let them think I'm bitter. That's easier than accepting I finally stopped giving. Lucia paused. "They won't stop. Gabby's mother's already calling the accountant." They can call the Pope if they want, I said. Doesn't change the deed. The next morning, Antonio called with one word. They filed. Filed what? An emergency injunction, attempting to unfreeze the joint account by claiming financial hardship. I exhaled. You're kidding. No, but I have the email here, and your original documentation is airtight. Your transfers were clean. You even used separate bank sources for personal versus joint assets. They don't have a case. I closed my eyes. That moment, the one where they tried to turn their mistake into my cruelty, was the clearest I'd ever seen them. They weren't just entitled. They were panicking because they'd underestimated me, and underestimated women like me, for decades. I hung up the call and stood in front of the mirror near my kitchen window. The same reflection. Gray waves tucked behind my ears. Pale olive skin with Time's map drawn across it. A nose that never healed right from when I tripped over Marco's bike when he was 7. A navy coat, always too warm, always necessary. And eyes? My eyes had never looked clearer. I didn't hate them. I just finally saw through them. Let them throw tantrums. Let them post, plead, threaten. None of it mattered anymore. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just stops answering. The following Monday, I opened my shutters to the sound of footsteps. A man stood at the gate with a bouquet, white tulips this time, and an envelope. He looked confused when I didn't open the door right away. I didn't recognize him, but I recognized the nervous posture. Marco used to stand like that when he was waiting to see if I'd found out he'd skipped math class. I opened the window just a crack. Can I help you? He cleared his throat. Delivery for Rosa Mancini from Gabby Solano. I don't accept flowers anymore, I said. He blinked. Ma'am, put them by the gate and take that envelope back with you. I'm supposed to. I said take it back. I closed the window. No more blooms hiding apologies. No more cards trying to buy my silence. Later that day, Antonio called. I have news. I'm sitting down, I said. He chuckled. They're trying to liquidate part of the honeymoon fund through a side platform. Gaby's cousin owns a small brokerage. She's funneling requests through his system. Illegal. Gray. Technically possible, if not caught. But not under my watch. Can we stop it? I already did. I paused. What did you tell them? That the cosigner has flagged all disbursements pending legal review. Which is true. I stood by the stove, watching my espresso percolate. The hiss of steam felt like punctuation. Good, I said. Let it simmer. I didn't expect to hear from my sister that evening, but she called. Juliana doesn't call unless someone's dead or dying. They came to Nana's grave. Rosa, she said without preamble. Marco and Gabby. I saw them light a candle. I waited. They were crying. Gabby left lilies. Marco looked like hell. I stirred my coffee. Was that supposed to move me? Juliana exhaled. You don't have to forgive them, but you're making them desperate. They're telling people you're going senile, that you're being manipulated. I let that hang in the air. They want sympathy now? I asked softly. After they used me like a credit card and deleted me like a spam message, I'm just saying, people are watching. Then let them, I said. Let them watch how a woman reclaims her value. One signature at a time. That night, I pulled out an old photo album, one from when Marco was little. Back when he still slept, curled at my feet during thunderstorms, before ambition rewired his sense of worth. There was a picture of Giovanni holding Marco on his shoulders. Giovanni's eyes said everything. Steady, loyal, proud. He'd hated liars. Couldn't stand hypocrisy. He once walked out of a dinner because a man bragged about tricking his cousin out of a car. Giovanni didn't say goodbye. He just left. The next morning, I opened my front door to find a letter on the steps. No postmark. Hand-delivered. Inside. We're sorry. We messed up. We should have thanked you. Should have called. Should have seen you. Please, come to dinner. No tricks. Just family. I folded the letter slowly. Dinner? They wanted a reset. But I wasn't a circuit breaker. I wasn't something to be flicked off and back on. I walked back inside and set the letter on the table. I didn't tear it up. Didn't burn it. I just left it there, letting it sit powerlessly in the air that had no need for its apology. At 4:07 p.m., I called my lawyer. I want to revise my will. He didn't sound surprised. I'd like the trust to skip Marco entirely, I said. Everything, my property, my accounts, my rights will pass to my goddaughter, Lucia's eldest, Anna. She's only 13, he said gently. She already says thank you. That's enough. For me. The next week passed quietly. No new texts, no flowers, no knocks at the door. And then one morning, I opened the news app on my phone and saw a headline. Design startup co-founder faces asset lockdown amid family dispute. The article was vague, but the comments weren't. People wondered who had pulled the strings. One user wrote, "Sounds like someone underestimated a silent investor." I smiled into my espresso. Just a small smile, but it lasted longer than any of Gabby's roses. That afternoon, I finally answered Marco's call, not to reconcile, to finish it. He spoke first. His voice was shaky. "Nine, Marco. I didn't know how far this would go." "I did." Silence. "We didn't mean to erase you," he said. "We just thought we needed space." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Space isn't the issue, Marco. Disrespect is." "We're sorry." "I know, but you're also predictable." More silence. "I updated the trust," I said. "I figured. You'll be fine. You have Gabby. You have your condo until the lease runs out. I don't want your money." "Good, because you're not getting it." We ended the call politely, like neighbors who once shared something meaningful but no longer wave across the fence. That evening, I walked to the old chapel where Giovanni and I got married. It was closed, the gate locked, but I didn't need to go inside. I just stood at the iron fence and whispered, "It's done." The wind rustled the olive trees nearby, and somewhere a bell tolled, not for mourning, but for something settled. The day after that final phone call, I went into town to buy groceries, not to make a statement, not to be seen, just to refill the pantry. But as soon as I stepped into the little market, I felt them. Eyes. The butcher stopped mid-wrap on someone's prosciutto. The cashier, who once asked how my knees were after surgery, suddenly had exact change and no small talk. People had read the article. They didn't know everything, but they knew enough. Knew that I wasn't just Rosa the widow with a crooked nose and blue coat. I was something else now. Someone who had quietly held the deed. Someone who finally stopped pretending she didn't. Back home, I unpacked the bags: flour, lentils, bay leaves, a half-wheel of pecorino. The kind Giovanni liked shaved over everything, even salad. When I opened the cabinet to put the jars away, a single sheet of paper fluttered out. I knew what it was before I bent down. Gabby's wedding invoice, one of the few they had emailed directly to me instead of Marco, a florist, in Florence. "Tunin $100 for cascading ivory roses and eucalyptus for the altar." They had written me a note at the time. "You're making our dream real. You'll be in every petal." Now those petals had turned to dust. I took the invoice and slid it into a folder marked closed. That felt like the right word. Around noon, Antonio texted, "Final filings confirmed. The fund is under your name only. Condo locked. Trust lit." I didn't reply. Not because I was ungrateful, but because I had nothing left to say. We'd already said everything in signatures and silence. That evening, I took a walk up to the Vineyard Road. Not far, just far enough to breathe different air. The sky was apricot pink, and the clouds looked soft enough to fold. I passed the Bruno's gate just as they were sitting down to dinner outside. Lucia called out, "Rosa, come eat." I raised a hand, smiled politely. "Maybe next time." But her husband stood up and jogged to the fence. He held out a folded napkin, inside a slice of fig tart. "I told Lucia we should have invited you from the start," he said. "You were right." I blinked. "Right?" He nodded slowly. "About knowing who you're raising." I took the tart, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of being seen, not as someone's mistake or stepping stone, but as a woman who'd acted with dignity. Not rage, just precision. Back home, I set the tart on the table, sliced a bite, and let the sweetness sit on my tongue for a while, before swallowing. That night, I wrote something in my notebook. Not a plan, not a recipe, a statement. They erased me from the table. So I built a new one. And this time, it's mine. 2 days later, Marco emailed me. A long letter, 5 paragraphs. The first few were apologies, the kind you write when someone else tells you to. But the last two? They were real. He said he remembered sitting on my lap while I read him bedtime stories. He said he still kept one of the comic books I bought him when we were too broke to turn on the heater. He wrote, "You didn't ruin us, Ma. You protected yourself. And maybe that's what hurts, realizing how little we deserved it." I closed the email and didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because closure doesn't always come with a reply. Sometimes, it's just the knowing. The next morning, I made gnocchi by hand. Rolled each one gently on the wooden board Giovanni made for me before our 10th anniversary. He carved the date into the underside. I ran my fingers across it like a prayer. Then I made enough for 3 people. Because someday, someone else would sit across from me again. Someone who asked questions. Someone who brought their own fork. I wasn't alone anymore. I was restored. Not as a mother, not as a martyr, but as Rosa, and that was enough. It rained that morning, the kind of soft, steady Italian drizzle that settles over the terracotta rooftops like a sigh. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching the olive tree branches shake gently in the breeze. The city moved slowly beneath the gray sky. And for once, so did I. There was nothing urgent left. No accounts to monitor, no filings to submit, no threats to counter, just weather and breath and the occasional drop of espresso that escaped the rim of my cup. Still, I wasn't done. There was one last account to close, the one no one knew about. Years ago, before Marco got engaged, before Gabby smiled with her rehearsed kindness, I had opened an account in Florence under a different name. Giovanni always said, "Don't put all your seeds in one field." So I did. This one was mine, fully, quietly. It held the residual payments from my part-time consulting I used to do for local shops, helping them balance books and manage renovations. I never talked about it, never needed to. But now it felt like the right time to open that account again. I called the branch. "Buongiorno," I said. "This is Signora Rosa Mancini. I'd like to reactivate my dormant Florence portfolio." The woman on the line confirmed my identity with 2 security questions and a smile in her voice. "You've kept everything intact," she said. "And with interest, you're sitting on a healthy sum." "Good," I said. "I have a project." She asked if I wanted investment options. "No," I replied. "I want to use it. By the end of the week." I had signed a lease for a vacant unit on the corner of Via del Limone. A small space with a faded blue awning and tiles in need of love. It had once been a tailor's workshop. Now it would be something else. A place with long tables, open windows, basil in clay pots, and shelves filled with flour, olive oil, and salt. Not a restaurant, not a business, something smaller, something mine. Lucia came to see the place the next day. She walked in, paused at the doorway, and said, "It smells like your old kitchen." I smiled. "Because I'm bringing the stone mortar from home." She ran her hand along the counter. "What will you call it?" I shrugged. "Doesn't need a name. It's not for sale." She gave me a look. "Then who's it for?" "Anyone who needs a seat." I didn't send invitations, didn't post online. But word got around. By Sunday, a knock came at the old wooden door. Anna, my goddaughter, peeked inside. She wore her school uniform and carried her sketchbook. "Can I sit?" she asked. I pointed to the long bench beneath the window. "Of course." I rolled dough while she drew. No questions, no noise, just presence. Exactly what I'd been denied. Exactly what I now gave freely, but only to those who earned it. The next week, Lucia brought 2 more girls, then the neighbor's son who wanted to learn how to make ravioli by hand. They came with their awkward hands and their mismatched stories, and I welcomed them all. Not as family, but as guests. Because a guest appreciates a seat. A guest asks before taking. A guest knows how to leave without damage. On the 12th day, I opened the old bakery drawer and found an envelope I hadn't touched in years. Giovanni's last letter. Not the worth one. This was a smaller note, written on the back of a receipt from the hardware store. It said, "If you ever need to start again, start where people eat without lying." I didn't know what he meant back then. But I do now. Marco hasn't called in over 2 weeks. I assume he's moved on. Maybe Gabby's trying to rebrand her business. Maybe they're doing interviews, trying to spin their losses as restructuring. I don't care. Not from cruelty, but from healing. Their story no longer controls mine. I am the author again. And I write in ink that doesn't smudge when others flinch. They built their lives on the quiet foundation of my labor. Now I've reclaimed that silence and turned it into a home. A week passed before I saw Marco again. Not in person, on a screen. Lucia came in early one morning, cheeks flushed from the breeze, phone in hand. She set it down on the counter next to the semolina. "I thought you might want to see it," she said hesitantly. I wiped my hands on a towel. "See what?" She turned the screen toward me. It was a clip, shaky, vertical, filmed in someone's backyard. Marco was standing near a fire pit, drink in hand, a few unfamiliar faces behind him. He looked thinner, tired. One of the women asked him how married life was. He gave a half shrug. "Not what we expected." Someone laughed. Then he said, "Her mom blew everything up, changed the will, froze the money. It's fine, we'll figure it out." I looked away. Lucia touched my arm. "He's blaming you now." "No," I said quietly. "He's telling the version of the story he can live with." That night, I sat at the long table by the window, just me and a bowl of lentil soup. The air smelled like garlic and sage. Outside, rain tapped the roof like a metronome. I didn't feel regret. Not even for a second. Because for the first time in years, every breath I took belonged to me. Not someone else's version of my usefulness. Not Marco's expectations. Not Gabby's performance. Mine. The next morning, a letter arrived at my gate. No stamp, no return address, just my name, Rosa, in Marco's handwriting. I carried it into the kitchen, left it on the counter, and didn't open it. I went about my day, cleaned the mortar, shaped pasta, taught Anna how to fold tortellini like tiny envelopes. The letter sat in the same spot, like a guest waiting for forgiveness. But I wasn't hosting anymore. That evening, I finally tore it open. It was short. "Ma, I've made a mess. Not just of the accounts. Of you. You did everything for me. I repaid it by pretending your sacrifice didn't matter. And when Gabby blocked you, I didn't stop her. I let it happen. Maybe because it was easier than facing how much I owed you. But it's not easier anymore. I'm sorry for all of it. If you ever want to talk about anything, I'll be at the cafe on Via Minore every Friday at 3. No expectations. Love. Marco." I folded the letter once, placed it in my apron pocket, and returned to the stove. Friday came. 3 o'clock passed. I didn't go. The dough needed resting. Anna was learning how to make soffritto. And I had a room full of young people who looked at me with curiosity, not pity. I didn't owe him a seat anymore. By Sunday, something in me softened. Not toward him, toward me. I walked into the back of the kitchen and opened a crate I hadn't touched in years. Inside, framed photographs. One of me and Giovanni on our 40th anniversary. Another of Marco's christening. And tucked in the corner, a photo of me at 18. Apron tied too tight, flour on my cheek, eyes squinting at the sun. I stared at that face for a long time. She didn't know what was coming. But she had something I wanted to get back. Not youth, not innocence. Conviction. That week, I started writing. Not a book, not a post. A record of every recipe I'd made from memory. Every piece of advice Giovanni gave me about money, tools, contracts, and every lesson I'd learned the hard way. Anna helped with the typing. I showed her how to measure flour by hand. She showed me how to save files to the cloud. She smiled as she typed the title, Rosa, How to Be Useful Without Being Used. On Thursday, I got another letter. This time, it wasn't from Marco. It was from the bank. A small bonus. Antonio had filed to reclaim an old certificate that had matured. It wasn't much, but it felt like a nod from the past. An echo that whispered, "You were never just helping. You were building." I went to bed that night without locking the door to my back garden. Not because I was careless, because I didn't need to feel fortified anymore. What they called losing was the best thing I ever did. It happened on a Tuesday. I was bringing a tray of biscuits out from the oven when Lucia came in, her expression tight. She handed me her phone. "Gabby posted something. I think you should see it." I didn't want to, but I looked. It was a photo of Marco and Gabby at a sleek restaurant table, candles, wine, her hand resting gently on his. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to lose something to realize who truly supports you. Grateful for new beginnings." New beginnings. As if I was the storm they'd survived. I handed the phone back. "Let them perform." Lucia's eyes softened. "You really don't care?" "I do," I said. "Just not about what they want me to care about." That afternoon, Anna painted a sign for the kitchen. She used leftover plywood and purple chalk paint. She wrote, "You don't need an invitation when you built the floor." I hung it above the doorway. People asked if we were opening for business. I said no. But the kitchen stayed open anyway. By the end of the week, word had spread. Neighbors dropped in with ingredients they didn't know how to use. A young man brought a sack of chestnuts. A woman donated a wheel of goat cheese her sister-in-law brought from Sardinia. I made soup, gnocchi, focaccia, no menus, no prices, just hands, passing plates. And finally, laughter. The kind that doesn't perform, the kind that belongs. Then, one afternoon, a woman I didn't know stepped into the doorway. She was older, well-dressed. Her hair pinned neatly, her eyes sharp. "Are you Rosa Mancini?" "I am. I'm Claudia Bellini. I run the Neighborhood Foundation Committee. Someone told me about what you've started here." I wiped my hands on a towel. "I didn't start anything. I just stopped hiding." She smiled. "We're organizing a local feature on spaces that restore community. Yours was nominated." I blinked. "By who?" "A young girl named Anna." Of course she did. The following Thursday, a photographer came. He was polite, asked for natural shots, no posing. He captured me, rolling out pasta, slicing lemons, laughing with Lucia. He took a photo of the quote Anna had painted and one of the notebook where I'd been writing my lessons. As he left, he said, "You've made something people are whispering about." "I've had enough of whispers," I said. "Let them speak out loud." That night, I thought about invitations. How long I waited for them. How many birthdays, holidays, and milestones I sat by the phone, hoping someone remembered. And then I thought, what if the invitation isn't meant for me? What if I'm the one who was meant to issue it? The next day, I asked Lucia to bring a stack of blank cards. On each one, I wrote a name. Women I knew who'd been cast aside. Widows, grandmothers, caretakers. I wrote, "This is not a business. It's a room with a seat. No RSVP required." One by one, they came. At first, hesitant. Then with loaves of bread, onions from their gardens, half-wrapped jars of fig jam. One woman brought a tray of anchovy-stuffed peppers. Another brought nothing but sat silently, eyes misting over as she watched us roll dough. They weren't there to cook. They were there to remember themselves. A week later, Claudia returned. She brought a copy of the article. My photo was on the front page of the neighborhood paper, smiling, mid-motion, dusting flour from my hands. The headline, "The Room Rosa Built." Underneath it, she paid for a wedding she was never invited to. So she made a table where no one had to ask permission to belong. I clipped it and pinned it to the corkboard by the window. Not for pride, for proof that when the door slams in your face, you don't knock again. You build a new frame and let the light in from your side. The week the article came out, people I hadn't seen in years started reappearing. The pharmacist who once gave me a discount on my blood pressure pills stopped by with biscotti. The librarian whose wedding I'd catered for free decades ago left a note tucked in the door. "I remember who you were. I see who you still are." Recognition after all these years felt strange. Like something I had to earn again, but this time, on my own terms. Then came the invitation. Hand-delivered. Marco's handwriting on the envelope. My full name spelled properly. No abbreviations, no Inside was a single cream card with gold lettering. "Marco and Gabby request the honor of your presence at the grand reopening of Atelier Noemi. This Friday, 6 p.m. Florence." No mention of the past. No apology. Just an assumption that I would come, that I would appear. That proximity to me now added legitimacy to them. I placed the invitation beside the bowl of olives on the table. Anna leaned over and read it. "You're not going, right?" I didn't answer. "Not yet." That afternoon, I went upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years. My mother's rosary, my wedding gloves, and a folder containing the final deeds, the ones that proved what was mine. I flipped through the pages. Deeds, transfers, the last notary stamps. Everything was sealed, permanent, legal. And yet, part of me still wanted to be seen. Not by them. By me. The version of me who had doubted for too long. The woman who thought kindness required erasing herself. The mother who'd been left out of a wedding she paid for, only to later learn she'd been the gift all along. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Marco. To Giovanni. You warned me that silence can be a form of surrender. But this silence, Gio, it's strategy. They tried to shame me into submission. But I turned the shame into shelter for others. I didn't fight them. I simply stepped aside and let their behavior reveal itself. I folded the letter and placed it in the coat pocket I still wore each morning. The navy one. The one with the hem slightly frayed. The one that knew everything. Friday arrived. At 6:01 p.m., Marco and Gabby's event began in Florence. At 6:05 p.m., I placed a tray of warm focaccia on the center table of my kitchen. At 6:15, I opened the door. The room filled, slowly at first. Then with more certainty. No lights, no string quartets, just the scent of roasted garlic. And a room built on remembrance, not reinvention. Around 7 p.m., Lucia walked in, carrying a folded printout. She handed it to me. It was from an online gossip page. One of those glossy lifestyle blogs. Headline: Atelier Noemi relaunches, but questions remain over family tensions and missing matriarch. I raised an eyebrow. Missing? Lucia grinned. You were the story, Rosa, even in your absence. I laughed. A real one. Let them look for me. Let them feel the space I didn't fill. That, too, is a kind of attendance. The next morning, I walked out to the market. Vendors greeted me like I'd grown taller overnight. Maybe I had. Maybe standing up for yourself does add inches. One of the florists handed me a small bouquet of marigolds. Per la signora che sa stare in piedi. For the woman who knows how to stand tall. I tucked them into my basket and smiled. They used to call it pride, this stance, this refusal to disappear. But now they were calling it something else. Proof. The news traveled quietly. First through the market, then whispered by neighbors. Then emailed to Lucia by someone who used to work for Gabby's startup. Atelier Noemi, Marco and Gabby's relaunch, had gone sideways. Investors pulled out after a brief audit. Something about inconsistencies, mismanagement, and a reputation issue. The article didn't name me, but everyone who read it understood who the ghost in the room was. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair. Soft, gray waves. That pale olive skin, worn like linen that had been folded too many times. My nose, the same one Gabby once laughed about behind my back, crooked, proud, exactly mine. And my eyes, clearer now, sharper, not bitter, just finished. I walked downstairs to my kitchen and found Anna at the counter, slicing figs for a tart. Did you see? She asked. I heard, I said. She paused. It's not satisfying? Seeing them stumble? I shook my head. Not in the way you think. She frowned. Why not? Because watching someone fall doesn't make your legs stronger, standing up does. Later that afternoon, Lucia stopped by. She brought a list of women who wanted to contribute to the space. One offered eggs. Another, lemons. A third offered to teach embroidery every Tuesday afternoon. It's growing, Lucia said. No, I said, it's returning. She smiled. What should we call it? I thought about that, then pointed to the painted sign above the doorway, the one Anna made. You don't need an invitation when you built the floor. That's the name, I said. Right there. A few days later, Marco emailed. Not a long message, just 3 lines. I know we failed you. I know we don't deserve another chance. But I wanted you to know I finally understand. I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't forgiven him, but because I had forgiven myself. For letting it go. For no longer needing them to change. That night, I took out the last ledger, the one I used for the wedding budget, years ago. Every line item still there. Linens, photographer deposit, rehearsal dinner cost. Next to each, I wrote in red ink, paid, but not owed. Then I closed the book. And for the first time since that summer, I felt no heat behind my ribs. Only space. Clean, silent space. The next morning, I opened the front door and found something waiting. A small box. Inside, a letter from Marco. And a chain with a charm. A tiny spoon. Silver. Engraved with the letter R. His note read, "You stirred everything. You kept us warm. I see that now. I didn't put it on. But I kept it. Because even a broken apology, if offered sincerely, has weight. And I'm no longer the woman who throws weight away." That evening, the kitchen was full. Children laughing, elders talking over one another, pots clanging. No ceremony. No spotlight. Just life, returning to itself. Lucia leaned over and whispered, "You know they're calling this place La Casa di Rosa." I shook my head. "It's not mine." She raised an eyebrow. "You paid for it." "Still not mine," I said. "It belongs to the people who walk through that door and don't leave anything worse than they found it. They took me off the guest list. So I built the house. And this time, the door stays open." It was nearly autumn. The first figs had ripened again, and the wind carried that soft golden scent that meant the season was turning. I stood by the window of the kitchen, watching the vines along the far fence begin to curl dry at the edges. Anna was humming while drying dishes. She'd started doing that lately, humming without even noticing. It meant something was working. That morning, I received a letter postmarked from Switzerland. I opened it slowly. It was from Gabby. I hadn't seen her handwriting in months, but the loops and flourishes were unmistakable. Inside was a single page. "Rosa, I don't expect you to respond. I don't even expect forgiveness, but I need to tell you I see it now. You didn't break us. We broke ourselves on your back. We used your generosity like a bank account and resented you when it came time to pay. I thought you were weak, but you were the steel that let everything stand. I hope, one day, our children get to learn from you. I'm sorry. Gabby." I set the letter down and made tea, not because I needed to process it, but because I already had. In the late afternoon, I walked the edge of the old vineyard. My legs ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that reminds you you're still alive inside them. I paused at the boundary stone where Giovanni and I used to rest during harvest. The initials we carved as teenagers were still faintly visible. G. I traced them with my thumb. "You wouldn't believe how loud it all got," I whispered to him. But I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I just stepped away. And in that stepping away, the silence returned. But not the kind that isolates. The kind that restores. That night, the kitchen filled again. Not just with neighbors, with strangers, visitors from Florence, friends of Claudia, even a young journalist who asked if he could write a piece for his podcast. He asked me what the secret was. I told him, "Say no once, say it fully, and the world you feared would collapse, reveals its shape." He blinked, then smiled, and asked for a second helping. Later, Anna helped me light the lanterns. She looked older lately, not in age, in awareness. I realized she had watched me lose everything and not collapse. She'd seen me not be invited and still create a room where everyone could gather. She'd learned, without a lecture, what dignity looks like when no one claps for it. And that, I decided, would be my legacy. The next morning, I woke early and began writing again. Not just recipes or records, something else. A small book. For Anna. For whoever came after. Title page. The life I wasn't invited to, and why that was the best thing that ever happened to me. A week passed. Then another. And then one afternoon, while making polenta, I heard a car door outside. I glanced through the window. Marco stood at the gate. Alone. He didn't call out. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. I didn't open the gate, but I opened the curtain wider. Let him see me. Let him know I saw him. That was enough. No more silent begging for acknowledgement. No more need to explain. He could carry the lesson in his own time. I had already done my part. Inside the kitchen, Anna stirred the pot. Lucia placed dishes on the table. People laughed. Life continued. I wasn't outside the party anymore, because I'd stopped trying to enter it. I built something better, not fancier, not louder, real. The life I wasn't invited to, I outgrew it. They never said it aloud before. Not when I was footing the bill. Not when I was sitting quietly in the background, holding my purse while they toasted to each other. But now they say it. Rosa. My name. Like it belongs to someone whose story couldn't be cut out with scissors just because it made them uncomfortable. It started with a small podcast interview. The young journalist returned, this time with a microphone and more thoughtful questions. He asked me what I thought about legacy. I told him, legacy isn't what people remember when you die. It's what they repeat when you're not in the room. He asked what I hoped people repeated. I looked around at the women kneading dough, the teenagers laughing near the window, the empty plates being refilled without fuss. That you can walk away from a family and still have one. The episode came out a week later. It went small viral, not explosive, just steady. People from towns I'd never lived in sent letters, handwritten, emails too. Widows, estranged mothers, even daughters who realized too late what their mothers had endured. One note read, I changed the locks last night. You helped me find the key I forgot I had. Another said, I haven't spoken in a room like I owned it in years. Until today. They didn't know me, personally. But they recognized the version of themselves I had refused to kill. Marco wrote again. This time, it was just 3 words. I heard it. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. That afternoon, Lucia brought in a frame. Inside was a screenshot of the podcast's episode art. She pinned it beside the original newspaper clipping. Above it, she added a small card with calligraphy that Anna had written, You left quietly. Now they say your name, with respect. I stood in front of it for a while. Not for vanity. For closure. One of the girls who helped in the kitchen, a shy one, with braces and quiet hands, asked me, How did you not scream when they hurt you? I paused. Then, answered. I did. Just not in a way they could understand. She looked confused. So I continued. I screamed with absence. With signatures. With the sound of one door closing and another opening that they couldn't walk through. That evening, a woman from Rome visited. She sat in the corner, observed the room, like a painter memorizing light. Later, she approached and said, We're putting together a book. Stories of women who redefined home. We want to include you. I laughed. I'm just a cook. She replied. No, you're a cornerstone. That night, I returned home and sat on the terrace. The breeze smelled of thyme and cool stone. I took out the charm, the little silver spoon Marco sent me. I strung it onto a leather cord and placed it around my neck. Not to remember him, but to remember me. The woman who stirred the pot and then walked away when the recipe no longer fed her soul. I fell asleep early, dreamless, and woke up with the birds. Because peace doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like waking up without dread. They say my name now, not because they have to, because it stands for something. Not sorrow, not abandonment, boundaries. And that is the most nourishing thing I've ever made. This morning, the apricot tree bloomed. It always surprises me when it does. The branches look too dry, the trunk too tired, but then without announcement, color returns. Just like that. No apology for the months of stillness. Only presence. That's what I am now. Not needed. Not claimed. Just present. Anna found me outside, notebook in hand, copying down the latest biscotti recipe I'd promised her. She asked if I would ever move. I smiled. I already did. She looked confused. So I explained. I moved out of the space they tried to keep me small in. I moved into the shape of my own story. She nodded slowly. And I knew she understood. Because at her age, that kind of understanding doesn't come from books, it comes from watching someone survive honestly. A few hours later, Claudia stopped by. She brought a bound copy of the Foundation's anthology, Women's Stories, collected from across the country. My chapter was second. She laughed. You would have been first, but you didn't send a photo. I shrugged. My story speaks loud enough. Inside, under the title The Kitchen She Built, were my words. I was not made to be remembered quietly. I was not made to only hold space. I am the architect of my survival. I am the recipe no one expected to last. And I will not pass this down in shame. Only in fire, salt, and truth. I closed the book and pressed it to my chest. Not with pride. with stillness. That evening, a soft knock came at the kitchen door. It was Marco. Not looking broken, not begging, just standing there. He held out a plain paper bag. Inside, a loaf of bread, freshly baked. "I used the recipe you wrote," he said. I held his gaze for a moment. "Did it rise?" He nodded. "Not perfectly, but enough." We stood there for a breath, and I could feel the air change, not colder, not warmer, just true. I didn't invite him in, but I didn't close the door either. He left the bread and walked away. That was enough. Sometimes mending doesn't need an audience. That night, I wrote one last line in my notebook. I wasn't meant to be a footnote. I was the author. Then I folded the page and slipped it between the recipe for my lemon cake and the last will I'd updated 2 years ago. Not for drama, for continuity. The next morning, Anna pinned up a new sign near the kitchen. "You taught us how to feed each other. But first, you taught us how to stop starving ourselves." She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. She understood what this house stood for. Not rebellion. Not revenge. Redefinition. Later, I sat beneath the apricot tree, warm coat over my shoulders, spoon charm at my throat, and listened to the gentle hum of life happening around me. No one asked me for money. No one asked me for silence. They asked me for presence. And I gave it freely. Not as a sacrifice, but as a choice. This isn't a story about being forgotten. It's a story about remembering yourself so deeply that even when others try to erase you, your name still blooms. My name is Rosa Mancini, and I was never lost. I simply stepped off stage long enough to build my own theater, with doors wide open and no assigned seating.